I never thought I'd be at war with my Homeowners Association over something as reasonable as solar panels, but here I am, watching my life savings drain away in legal fees. Welcome to Whispering Pines Estates, where your dream home can quickly turn into a nightmare at the whims of one determined woman, Valerie Prestwick, HOA president and self-appointed dictator of our suburban paradise. You can't possibly think those hideous panels are staying on your roof, Mr. Lambert, Valerie said to me, her perfectly manicured finger wagging in my face. This was the third time she knocked on my door this week, each visit more hostile than the last. I'm Thomas Lambert, but everyone calls me Tom. I'm just a regular electrician who wanted to save some money on utilities and do something good for the planet. After 10 years of saving, I finally had enough to install solar panels on my modest ranch-style home. I researched thoroughly, got all the proper permits, and hired a reputable company for the installation. Everything was done by the book, or so I thought. The covenants clearly state that all exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee, Valerie continued, her voice rising with each word. And these eyesores would never be approved. I did submit my application, I replied calmly, though my patience was wearing thin. 3 months ago, actually. I never received a response, which according to Section 4.3 of our bylaws means automatic approval after 30 days. Valerie's eyes narrowed. We never received any application. I have the certified mail receipt and delivery confirmation, I countered, folding my arms across my chest. Something flickered across her face, annoyance, perhaps, or something more calculated, before she regained her composure. Well, we'll just have to take this up with the board. In the meantime, those panels need to come down. You have 72 hours. She turned sharply, her heels clicking against the pavement as she marched back to her Mercedes SUV. I watched her drive away, a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just about solar panels anymore, this felt personal. What I didn't realize then was that Valerie's husband, Gregory Prestwick, was the regional sales director for Eastern Grid Electricity. The same company whose profits would suffer if too many homeowners in our community went solar. But I wouldn't discover that connection until much later. The next day, I received a certified letter from Prestwick and Associates, attorneys at law, demanding the immediate removal of my solar installation and threatening legal action if I failed to comply within the specified timeframe. The letter also mentioned potential daily fines of $250 for noncompliance. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking. Prestwick and Associates? Was this some coincidence, or was Valerie related to this law firm? Either way, I couldn't afford to pay $250 a day, and I certainly couldn't afford to remove the solar panels I'd just spent my savings installing. That night I barely slept. I paced my living room, wondering what my options were. I couldn't fight a legal battle against the HOA, they had a reserve fund specifically for litigation. My neighbor Gerald had tried standing up to them last year over a disputed fence height, and ended up selling his house to cover legal expenses. But I refused to be bullied. The next morning, I called every affordable attorney in the county, explaining my situation. Most were sympathetic but warned me about the uphill battle against HOAs. Finally, I reached Zoe Hartman, a young environmental law specialist who had just opened her own practice. Solar panels, huh? She said after hearing my story. And you're in Colorado? Mr. Lambert, I think we might have a case here. Are you familiar with Colorado's solar access laws? I wasn't, but her confidence gave me hope. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a local coffee shop to discuss strategy. Zoe was younger than I expected, probably in her early 30s, with bright eyes and an energy that suggested she actually enjoyed legal battles. She arrived with a stack of papers and a determined smile. The HOA doesn't have a leg to stand on, she explained, spreading documents across the table. Colorado has had solar access laws since 1979, and they were strengthened in 2008. Essentially, HOAs cannot prohibit the installation of solar energy devices. Then why are they suing me? I asked. Because most homeowners don't know their rights and will cave under pressure, she replied. HOAs count on intimidation. But we're not going to let them get away with it. Just as Zoe was explaining our countersuit options, I noticed a familiar figure at the counter. Valerie Prestwick stood ordering a latte, her back to us. When she turned around, her eyes locked with mine, then flicked to the legal documents spread across our table. Her mouth tightened into a thin line before she abruptly changed direction and headed for the exit without her coffee. That was the HOA president, I whispered to Zoe. Perfect, Zoe grinned. Let her worry for a change. The next day, another letter arrived, this one notifying me of a special HOA meeting to discuss my violations. All homeowners were encouraged to attend. This wasn't just legal action anymore. Valerie was trying to turn my neighbors against me. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in our community clubhouse. When I arrived with Zoe, the room was already packed. I recognized most faces, neighbors I'd waved to while walking my dog or chatted with at community cookouts. Now they looked at me with curiosity, confusion, or in some cases, open hostility. Valerie sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members. She tapped a gavel to call the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming to this important meeting, she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. As you may have noticed, one of our homeowners has decided that the rules don't apply to him. She gestured toward me. Mr. Lambert has installed solar panels without proper approval, creating an eyesore that affects all our property values. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt my face growing hot. We have always prided ourselves on maintaining the aesthetic harmony of Whispering Pines, Valerie continued. That's why we all bought homes here, isn't it? For the beautiful, consistent look of our neighborhood. Several heads nodded in agreement. My heart sank. Furthermore, Valerie added, the board has consulted with legal counsel, who confirms that we are within our rights to demand the removal of these unauthorized installations. That's when Zoe stood up. Actually, she announced clearly, I'd like to address that point. All eyes turned to her. Valerie's smile faltered slightly. I'm Zoe Hartman, Mr. Lambert's attorney, she introduced herself. And while I appreciate the board's concern for community aesthetics, I must point out that the HOA's position directly violates Colorado state law. She walked confidently to the front of the room, pulling documents from her briefcase. Specifically, Colorado Revised Statute Section 38-30-168, which prohibits HOAs from effectively prohibiting the installation of solar energy devices. The room went quiet. Valerie's face remained composed, but I noticed her knuckles whitening as she gripped her gavel. That's all very interesting, Valerie responded. But our covenants clearly state, state law supersedes your covenants. Zoe interrupted politely but firmly. And the law is quite explicit. I have copies for everyone if you'd like to review it. She began distributing papers to the board members. Valerie glanced at the document, then pushed it away. This doesn't change the fact that proper procedures weren't followed. Actually, Mr. Lambert submitted his application through certified mail 3 months ago, Zoe countered. We have proof of delivery. According to your own bylaws, failure to respond within 30 days constitutes automatic approval. The crowd began whispering. I noticed several neighbors looking at me with newfound sympathy. Well, Valerie stammered, the application must have been lost. These things happen. That's unfortunate, Zoe replied smoothly. But according to your bylaws, the responsibility lies with the committee to maintain proper records. The 30-day automatic approval stands. Valerie's face flushed red. She leaned over to whisper something to the board member beside her, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. There's something else the community should know, I said, finally finding my voice. The law firm that sent me the threatening letter, Prestwick and Associates, is that connected to you, Valerie? The room went completely silent. All eyes turned to Valerie, whose composure visibly cracked. My husband's firm occasionally does legal work for the HOA, she admitted stiffly. It's never been a secret. Isn't that a conflict of interest? Asked Mrs. Gonzalez from the back row, a retired schoolteacher who rarely spoke at meetings. And isn't your husband Gregory Prestwick the regional sales director for Eastern Grid Electricity? I continued, recalling what I'd discovered during late-night research. The same company that stands to lose revenue if more homeowners install solar panels? The meeting erupted into chaos. Neighbors were standing, asking questions all at once. Valerie banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. The other board members looked stunned, exchanging worried glances. "This meeting is adjourned!" Valerie finally shouted over the noise, gathering her papers hastily. But the damage was done. As people filed out of the clubhouse, several stopped to express support for my solar panels. Some even asked for information about installation costs. That night, I should have felt victorious, but something kept nagging at me. If Valerie had been so confident in her legal position, why had she looked so shaken when Zoe mentioned the state law? And why would she risk her reputation over something as insignificant as one homeowner's solar panels? The next morning, Zoe called with unexpected news. "The HOA hasn't withdrawn their legal action," she informed me. "In fact, they're doubling down. We've been served with a formal lawsuit claiming your installation violates multiple covenants beyond just the approval process." "That doesn't make sense," I replied. "After last night, why would they push this?" "I don't know," Zoe admitted. "But I'm going to find out. In the meantime, I'm filing our countersuit citing the state law violations." The lawsuit dragged on for weeks. The HOA's legal arguments grew increasingly convoluted, claiming that my solar panels exceeded height restrictions, created dangerous glare for traffic, and even violated noise ordinances, though they produced no evidence of noise. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the neighborhood. 3 other homeowners who had expressed interest in solar installations after our meeting reported receiving threatening letters about unrelated covenant violations, overgrown hedges, unapproved mailboxes, and improperly stored trash cans. Gerald, my neighbor who had previously lost his battle with the HOA, invited me over for a beer one evening. "This isn't just about solar panels, Tom," he said gravely, keeping his voice low even though we were alone in his garage. "Last year when I fought them on my fence, I started digging into the HOA finances." "What did you find?" I asked, suddenly alert. "Nothing concrete," Gerald admitted. "But there were strange transfers to a company called Sunnyvale Consulting. Large amounts listed under Community Development Research. I couldn't trace who owned Sunnyvale before they shut me down with legal fees." I relayed this information to Zoe the next day. She listened intently, then said, "I think it's time we request a full financial audit of the HOA as part of our discovery process." 2 days later, we received notice that the HOA had withdrawn their lawsuit against me. The letter cited community harmony and desire to resolve disputes amicably as reasons for the withdrawal. I should have felt relieved, but something didn't add up. "They're hiding something," Zoe agreed when I called her. "The timing is too convenient. They didn't want us digging into their finances." "So what do we do now?" I asked. "We continue our countersuit," she replied firmly. "And we still request those financial records." The court date for our countersuit arrived on a crisp autumn morning. I arrived early with Zoe, who looked confident despite facing the HOA's expensive legal team from Prestwick and Associates, now revealed to be headed by Gregory Prestwick himself, Valerie's husband. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Many of my neighbors had come to watch, along with several strangers taking notes. Zoe explained they were environmental activists and journalists interested in HOA's solar restrictions. When Valerie entered with her husband and 2 other attorneys, she looked shocked by the audience. Her usual composure was noticeably absent as she whispered urgently to Gregory. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, called the court to order. "I understand the original complaint has been withdrawn," she began. "But the countersuit alleges violations of state law and requests financial records. Is that correct?" Zoe stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client was subjected to improper and illegal restrictions on his solar installation, in direct violation of Colorado law. We believe these actions were not merely procedural overreach but potentially motivated by conflicts of interest. Gregory Prestwick rose next. Your Honor, the HOA has withdrawn its complaint in good faith. The counterclaim is now moot and should be dismissed. As for the financial records, there is no legal basis for such invasive discovery when no financial impropriety has been alleged. The judge considered this. Ms. Hartman, can you explain why financial records are relevant to your claim about solar panel restrictions? Zoe was prepared. Yes, Your Honor. We have reason to believe that HOA funds have been improperly allocated to a consulting company with potential ties to Eastern Grid Electricity, where Mr. Prestwick serves as Regional Sales Director. This would represent not only a conflict of interest but potentially misappropriation of HOA funds to further corporate interests against renewable energy adoption. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge banged her gavel. That's absurd! Gregory Prestwick exclaimed. These are baseless accusations. If they're baseless, then the financial records should prove that. The judge replied coolly. I'm granting the discovery request for the HOA's financial records for the past 5 years. Valerie's face had gone completely white. She clutched her husband's arm, whispering something that made him frown deeply. After court adjourned, Zoe and I were approached by a woman who introduced herself as Rebecca Chin, an investigative reporter with the local newspaper. I've been tracking complaints against HOAs statewide, she explained. Your case caught my attention because it matches a pattern I've been seeing, HOAs aggressively fighting solar installations in areas served by Eastern Grid. You think there's a connection? I asked. I don't have proof yet, Rebecca admitted. But I'd be very interested in what those financial records reveal. The next week was eerily quiet. No communication from the HOA, no new letters, not even the usual email reminders about community rules. Then, late Friday afternoon, Zoe called. Tom, you need to come to my office right now, she said, her voice tense with excitement. The financial records arrived, and you won't believe what I found. I drove to her office immediately. When I arrived, she had papers spread across her conference table and a triumphant gleam in her eye. Sunnyvale Consulting, she announced, pointing to a series of payments. Just like your neighbor mentioned. Over the past 3 years, the HOA has paid them nearly $300,000 for community development research. That seems excessive, I remarked. What kind of research costs that much? Exactly, Zoe replied. So I dug deeper. Sunnyvale Consulting is registered to a shell company, which is owned by another shell company, which ultimately leads back to a subsidiary of Eastern Grid Holdings. I sat down heavily. So the HOA has been funneling money to Valerie's husband's company? Essentially, yes. But it gets worse. She slid another document toward me. These are minutes from a board meeting last year. They specifically discussed strategies to discourage solar adoption in the community and allocated funds for educational materials about the drawbacks of solar energy. Can they do that? No, Zoe said firmly. Using HOA funds collected from homeowners to advance a corporate agenda against those same homeowners' interests is a breach of fiduciary duty. And the undisclosed conflict of interest makes it even worse. We decided to present our findings at the next HOA meeting, scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Zoe prepared a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office and worked with Rebecca Chin on a feature story about HOA solar restrictions. The night of the meeting arrived with tension in the air. The clubhouse was packed beyond capacity, with homeowners spilling out the door. Valerie was conspicuously absent, with the vice president conducting the meeting instead. We've had to make a change to tonight's agenda, the vice president announced nervously. President Prestwick has temporarily stepped down from her duties due to personal reasons. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Before we continue with regular business, he continued, Mr. Lambert has requested time to address the community. I approached the podium with Zoe beside me, my heart pounding. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for Valerie and what was about to happen to her carefully constructed world. Almost. Good evening, neighbors, I began. What I'm about to share will be shocking, but it's supported by the HOA's own financial records and meeting minutes. For the next 15 minutes, I explained everything we had discovered: the payments to Sunnyvale Consulting, the connection to Eastern Grid, the deliberate campaign against solar energy, and the massive conflicts of interest. The reaction was immediate and furious. Homeowners shouted questions and demands for resignations. Several called for criminal investigations. "The entire board should resign immediately," shouted one homeowner. "We've been paying for this with our dues?" demanded another. The vice president struggled to maintain order, finally admitting that he and the other board members had been unaware of the Sunnyvale connection. "We were told it was for community planning expertise," he insisted. So he stepped forward. "We've filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office," she announced. "We're also preparing a civil suit on behalf of all homeowners to recover the misappropriated funds." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Several board members resigned on the spot. Others insisted on emergency elections for new leadership. 2 days later, the story broke in the local paper, complete with documents proving the financial connections between the HOA and Eastern Grid. By that afternoon, it had been picked up by national news outlets focusing on corporate interference with renewable energy adoption. The fallout was swift. Valerie and Gregory Prestwick quickly listed their house for sale. Eastern Grid issued a statement claiming no knowledge of their executive's activities and placing him on administrative leave pending investigation. A week later, Zoe called with news that left me speechless. "The Attorney General's office is filing criminal charges against Valerie and Gregory Prestwick," she informed me. "Wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and breach of fiduciary duty." Criminal charges? Really? I had expected civil penalties at most. "They found a lot more than we did," Zoe explained. "This wasn't just happening in your HOA. They've uncovered similar schemes in at least 12 other communities across 3 states, all served by Eastern Grid. It appears to have been a coordinated corporate strategy to slow solar adoption." The story only got bigger from there. Environmental groups highlighted it as an example of utility companies fighting against renewable energy. State legislators promised to strengthen solar access laws and HOA oversight. As for Whispering Pines Estates, we held emergency elections and installed a completely new board, including Gerald, my neighbor who had first noticed the financial discrepancies. Their first official act was to adopt a formal resolution supporting renewable energy installations. 3 months after that fateful HOA meeting where Zoe first presented the solar access law, I stood in my driveway watching as the Prestwicks' moving truck pulled away. They had sold their house at a significant loss, unable to face their neighbors after the scandal. My doorbell rang. It was Rebecca Chin, the reporter. "I thought you'd want to see this before it goes to print," she said, handing me an advance copy of her latest article. The headline read, "Eastern Grid CEO resigns amid expanding investigation into anti-solar conspiracy." It wasn't just the Prestwicks, she explained. The scheme went all the way to the top. They found emails directing regional managers to leverage HOA relationships to combat the existential threat of residential solar. That evening, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue in my backyard. As the sun set, the lights in my home switched on, powered entirely by the solar panels on my roof. Gerald raised his glass in a toast. "To Tom," he announced, "who just wanted to install some solar panels and ended up bringing down a corporate conspiracy." Everyone laughed and cheered. As I looked around at my neighbors, now friends united by a common cause, I felt a deep satisfaction. The solar panels that had almost cost me my home had ultimately created a stronger community. 6 months later, Zoe called with the final piece of news. "The class action lawsuit has been settled," she announced. "Eastern Grid has agreed to pay $50 million to affected homeowners across all the communities where they interfered with solar adoptions." "How much does that mean for our neighborhood?" I asked. "Each homeowner in Whispering Pines will receive approximately $8,000, she replied. "The board is proposing to use part of the settlement to establish a community solar garden for those who can't install panels on their individual homes." "That's perfect," I said. And Valerie and Gregory? They accepted a plea deal, Zoe informed me. No prison time, but substantial fines, community service, and 5 years probation. They're also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or working in the utility industry. After we hung up, I walked outside and looked up at my solar panels gleaming in the afternoon sun. What had started as a simple desire to reduce my carbon footprint and save on electricity had turned into something much bigger than I could have imagined. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about defending your own rights, it's about protecting everyone's right to a cleaner, more sustainable future. As for me, my electric bill is now practically zero, and I've used some of the settlement money to add battery storage to my system. The best part? Every time a moving truck brings new neighbors to Whispering Pines Estates, one of the first things they learn is that solar panels are not just permitted here, they're encouraged. And that's a welcome change we can all live with.